What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Discovering Bob Dylan podcast. I'm joined here, as always, by my co-host, Dylan Seavey. We're running through all 40 of Bob Dylan's albums. We are at album number 33 today. We'll be discussing Together Through Life, an album that I was not aware of its existence as recently as probably after we started this podcast together, is when I learned about Together Through Life by browsing through all the albums that I was going to have to listen to in my life here. And I was very surprised that there was one called Together Through Life that came out in 2009. No. Yeah, we've reached it. And I don't think I've heard you ever mention this one before. So what are we in for here?
Well, um, there's partially a reason for that, I would say. Before we get into that, two things. Firstly, I would feel remiss if we didn't pull the curtain back a little bit. We are recording this episode on June 11th, 2025. Maybe it'll be out within a week or two from this day. But we did learn earlier today that Brian Wilson passed away, and maybe you guys have something else planned on the channel. I'm not sure, but it would be remiss not to mention it. Obviously, you are a big Beach Boys fan. I've been on record that I am not as big a fan, but I do enjoy them to some extent. And regardless of my own level of enjoyment, I recognize them as one of the most important groups of the 20th century, and certainly Brian Wilson is one of the most important composers in popular music going back to the classical era, including your Mozarts and your Beethovens. Unbelievable melodic and harmonic master, and it didn't feel right to not say something. So rest easy, Brian.
Well, to tie that into Bob Dylan a little bit, Bob Dylan had a nice tweet about that today. He wrote, "Heard the sad news about Brian today and thought about all the years I've been listening to him and admiring his genius. Rest in peace, dear Brian." And it's weird to think about them as like contemporaries, but I mean, they basically started almost the same year, and they could not have taken different, more different paths, but two, geniuses, titans of the musical world. And I'm not surprised, Bob Dylan obviously loves Brian Wilson and all that, but it's kind of weird to hear him say it or tweet it, I should say. It's weird that he's on Twitter. That's a whole different thing, but to have him tweet about it, you know, it, even though they're both like, geniuses, they I feel like they've like never talked or never met in their entire lives because they're just so different about like everything about them. And of course, everything comes together in tragedy. But
Shout out to our boy Aiden, a big member in our Discord community. He sent me a message today with a story, apparently, and I have no idea if this is true or not. I really want to believe it is. Apparently, according to Brian Wilson, they never crossed paths in person until 2023, when they were both at a hospital together. Brian was just having a routine check-in, and Bob was in there, I think he said, with a broken thumb. And Bob came up to him and said, "Are you Brian Wilson?" And he said, "I am." And he said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Bob Dylan." And that,
that, if
listen,
that is true, it makes so much sense, but also like beggars belief that they could never, be in the same place at the same time.
I just, obviously Brian has his well documented mental health struggles, so it's very possible that they had met in years prior, and he could not recall. I mean, they were at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony together in 1988, but it's possible. The night of Mike Love's historic speech, wherein he called out all of his contemporaries for being chicken shit, among other phrases that he used. But
Well,
Also funny because I believe the year before that, in 2022, there's a video of Bob Dylan singing Happy Birthday to Brian Wilson backstage, playing it on a very sloppy guitar, wishing him a happy 80th birthday. So, you know,
knowing their mental states in the 80s, it's quite possible that, they just don't remember that.
very true.
Um,
But yes, rest easy, Brian. And yeah, certainly game recognized game, as the kids say when it comes with Bob and Brian. And secondly, just a mea culpa. As we mentioned in the last episode for Modern Times, it was our first episode that we had recorded in quite some time due to scheduling conflicts and other real life things going on, and shaking off the rust a little bit. And thanks to all of our YouTube commenters who alerted me to the fact that we very stupidly in our preparation, I was so hell bent on getting my notes for the album together that I failed to mention in between Love and Theft in Modern Times. Bob stars in his second Hollywood movie. We, of course, have Hearts of Fire, the incredible 87 film that we should do a watch party for, maybe a Patreon exclusive. But in 2003, he stars in Masked and Anonymous, which I have seen. I actually don't think I've seen it in 20 years now. It is a crazy kind of avant garde film with a great soundtrack that Bob recorded a few tunes for. It's totally wild. It's really cool, and it has an insane cast. I believe I know Jeff or John Goodman is definitely in it. I think Penelope Cruz is in it. It's wild. But that was a reason for the 5 year gap, as was the release of 2004's Chronicles Volume One, his first book. He wrote some books in the 60s, some stream of consciousness, probably hopped up on amphetamines, poetry. But this is his first book, kind of discussing different parts of his career. And in that book, he discusses a bit of the recording of New Morning, a little bit of Oh Mercy, and it reads exactly kind of what you'd expect a Bob Dylan book to read like. It's a really fascinating read. That was 2004, and now in 2025, 21 years later, there are breadcrumbs that volume 2 may finally be on the way. Because I believe in an interview recently, Sean Penn let it slip that he recorded the audiobook for it. So we'll see if that comes out, but we failed to mention those. Thanks again to our very diligent YouTube commenters. That was a big mistake on our end, and all we can do is try to be better.
yeah. Well, all right. So we're about done with the podcast, I think. No. Long intro. Maybe that speaks to the quality of Together Through Life. I'm not sure. We'll see. We'll talk about it. Let's get into it. Let's talk
Yeah.
about the reason we're all here today.
Yes.
Let's talk about Together Through Life. Like we said, 2009, Bob's 33rd album. Not, we sort of dropped the whole talking about the lore behind these albums because there just doesn't seem to be as much. And that's probably because it's a lot more contemporary and, there's not like shrouded in mystery. But this one has, an interesting start to it, I think. The idea of it started to form in Bob Dylan's mind after Olivier Dahan, I think is how you say his name, who directed Amelie, asked him to write a song for his movie, My Own Love Song. And said Dylan wrote a song, which is on this album, Life is Hard for it, and did some other music for it. I'm not sure exactly what appeared in the movie. I've never seen it. I'd never heard of it before. So that kind of started the genesis of it. Also interesting to note that he co-wrote every song except one with Robert Hunter, who, of course, collaborated with the Grateful Dead for so many years and was collaborated with Bob Dylan himself less successfully on 1988's. Which one was that?
They wrote both Silvio and Ugliest Girl in the World
Hmm.
together. So
Yeah, so hopefully this third time's a charm, right? Right, boys?
I'm a Silvio defender. I know that you are not a fan, but Ugliest Girl in the World, definitely not really one to hang our hats on,
No,
I would
certainly
say.
not.
Not for the men who respectively wrote both Ripple and Like a Rolling Stone.
Yeah, a little step down, I think, on that one. So Hunter's back for the most part, and I don't know how much Bob was touring in between. I'm sure you'll tell us. Modern Times and this one. There's about a 3 year gap between the two, so not super long. Long for Bob. I mean, 3 years for Bob is still kind of a long time. But he comes back with most of the same players as he had on Life is Hard. The differences, Stu Kimball and Denny Freeman are out on guitar, and in is Mike Campbell of Heartbreakers fame, who plays guitar and mandolin on this one. So a bit of a different feel. Do you have more backstory on this one about the break and everything else that Bob was going through? What was going through his head at the time?
Well, I can safely say, truly, nothing too much happened in between. Um, and yeah, he was most certainly touring between the two records. I mean, it's been the never-ending tour since 1988 for a reason. So that's been going on. And then, like you said, brings in Campbell also brings in David Hidalgo from Los Lobos to play accordion, among other things. And then, so like you said, truly not too much. And I remember when this record came out. I've fond memories of when this record came out. I saw Bob, I want to say twice in 2009, and two very good shows. I have excellent memories of those shows in particular. And also at this time, I was really in the thick of my I basically didn't listen to anything but Tom Petty between like 2007 and 2010. So like I'm in the thick of it. So the fact that Bob has a new album coming out and Mike Campbell is on it, this is so awesome for me. And we talked a little bit in the last episode, or I think I mentioned in the last episode that sometimes you listen to an album and you get an idea in your head of what it's like. And then you revisit it many years later and you're so surprised to find that that shine that you're like, is it still going to hold up? Like, and it hasn't worn up. And that's how I feel with Modern Times. It's been almost 20 years and I still feel as positively about that record as I did back then. Together Through Life, you know, I don't dislike this album, and I'm going to take the reins here, and I won't go into everything, but I'll at least lead. I don't think this is a bad record. I think there are a handful of songs on this record that I like very fine enough, but I do think, and I've thought about this quite a lot, this may be the most inconsequential album of Bob's entire career. Even, which again, not speaking on its quality, because I like this album more than at least probably 10 to 15 of his records. However, even the mid 80s horror shows, those are so integral to his story. Um, Even the covers albums from the 90s, the acoustics ones, some people may argue those. I don't think those are inconsequential at all. I think those are very important to understanding how he got back to eventually Time Out of Mind and the Renaissance. Together Through Life is a professionally recorded album with professional musicians and another professional co-writer that sounds like professional music, and it exists, and we can't take that away from it. But if you deleted this album from his catalog, the story of Bob Dylan would not be impacted whatsoever. That does not necessarily need to have any bearings on the quality of the record or how much we like the record. However, there's a reason that when people talk about this great modern day Renaissance, they talk about the trilogy of Time Out of Mind, Love and Theft, and Modern Times. Very few people mention Together Through Life in the same sentence because it's not on that level. I don't think it is, at least. I can go into some more thoughts, but I'll open it up to you. Do you agree with that assessment? Where are you at with it?
Well, I mean, I'm not the scholar of the Dylan, discography you are, but that tracks. That makes sense. You saying that does not color my feelings on this record really at all. And when I was reading about it, it seemed a little slighter. There wasn't much in the Wikipedia entry. There wasn't that much in the big Bob Dylan book that I'm reading about it. It just kind of seems like an album that happened, and that's it. There's no long-lasting influence on his music. It really didn't draw from, the same well as the trilogy, between Time Out of Mind, Love and Theft, and Modern Times. It kind of feels on its own, and I'll have to ask this question: is it more or less, consequential than the Christmas album that also came out in 2009?
Well, the Christmas album is potentially the most important album ever released in the history of Western civilization. Well, I'll ask you this. Before we started this podcast, even after we started this podcast, you were maybe not even aware of Together Through Life. How many times in your life have you heard about Bob? You've probably heard
Many.
about it quite a
I've heard
bit.
about the Christmas album a
Yeah.
lot. You're right. I knew that was coming. That's an excellent rebuttal
So,
on your part.
and,
So,
and again, that is not
answers that question.
it's not a commentary on necessarily the objective quality. It certainly does not need to be a commentary on our subjective opinions on it. However, the fact that Bob Dylan in the year of our Lord 2009 made a Christmas album is still one of the most hilarious and unexpected events. It is still commonly brought up among fans and even casual music fans.
I will be honest. I think if Dylan had not released that Christmas album, this album that we're talking about might have gotten a little more, you know, legacy behind it. It was totally overshadowed by the Christmas album. It all makes sense. And here's the weird thing. This is Bob Dylan's only album to hit number one in both the US and the UK. It, totally ridiculous factoid. That may have changed with Rough and Rowdy Ways. I'm not sure if the Bob Dylan book covers that one. But
Well, 2009 is a historically listen, there's some good albums from '09, but
there's a couple.
eh,
It sold 125,000 copies in the U.S. in its first week alone. That's not a bad number. People would kill for that number today. That's for damn sure.
absolutely. And it was coming off a run of albums that were critically acclaimed. So yeah, I know for me, I bought it the day it came out. So
And the reviews of this one aren't terrible either. I mean, they're actually
yeah,
quite strong. It's not, modern times, and you're not going to see it on any top 500, of all time lists. But when it came out, it was, very well reviewed, probably on the same level as something like Oh Mercy. So I think its lack of standing and legacy happened after the fact, and there's nothing about the album, that foretold its place in the Bob Dylan sphere and the music sphere where it kind of got just overshadowed and buried. It seemed like, another win for Bob when it came out, but it just did
Sure.
not have that long-standing appeal, I guess.
Yeah, it is interesting. And look, I do not base, we'll get into my opinion. Everything that I just stated is more so something that I would argue almost as a fact. It has nothing to do with my opinions on the individual songs. And I don't generally base my opinions of a record on, yeah, critical or cultural standing. If those things inform my, if I can understand those things to a degree that they do inform my opinion, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But if I like an album, I like an album. It doesn't matter if it's consequential, inconsequential. So I don't want to be mistaken for that. But it is interesting because, since this album, his next album of all original material, Tempest, within the Dylan sphere, I think has kind of taken on this sort of almost like Planet Waves like uh, view where it got very good reviews when it came out, and then it maybe wasn't as forgotten about as much as this record, but you hear a lot of people talk about like, okay, well, obviously there's the big three, but that album Tempest is really good. Kind of in the same way of like, okay, yeah, Blood on Tracks and Desire are great, but you got to go back to Planet Waves as well. And Tempest has taken that on. It's been 5 years since Rough and Rowdy Ways at this point, and that album's critical acclaim has maintained very, very consistently since then. This one truly has just gotten lost in the shuffle. And in your opinion, do you think that is deserved?
Well, yeah, let's jump into it. You asked me in the last episode to think about what I thought the next step would be for Dylan after Modern Times, lyrically and musically. And my thought was that he was going to turn into Tom Waits, both musically and just like kind of that like drunken buffoon sort of hobo, like just everything, like Tom Waits it up totally. Especially since, this was before the Sinatra covers, so basing it on modern times, I thought, okay, he's either going to go bluesy, Tom Waits, kind of buffoonery, or Frank Sinatra crooner. And I thought it was a little early for the crooner stage, so Tom Waits is what I went with. And after the first song, I thought I was going to be right because the first tune on the album, Beyond Here Lies Nothing, kind of has that like woozy, boozy, drunken stupor to it. Like it's a little hazy sounding. You kind of got that prominent lead guitar right off the bat, but then you also have these horns, accordion. It feels like somewhere between like New Orleans and El Paso with, some blues in it as well. And I was like, ah, nailed it. And then, and his voice is so gravelly. It's very much a step down, I think, from modern times. I think there's a lot of weathering that went on in those 3 years. And that was kind of what I was dreading, that full descent in the Tom Waitsian ravaged vocals. But the album doesn't really stay that, direction after the first track. It does change, and what I thought it was going to be, the more New Orleans, it really ends up being more Tex-Mex. And a lot of it's the accordion from Los Lobos's David Hidalgo, and I think Mike Campbell's guitar has that like Texas blues sound to it as well. So it was going like this, and then it kind of, and not that I hated the first track either. It just I was fearing the direction the album would go. But I think actually the first track is pretty good on an island, even though the vocals, you know, they're getting close to the point where I don't like them, and that's going to be tough probably for these next albums. And there's no Chris Shaw on this, I gotta say, the engineer that did wonders for Bob's voice on Love and Theft and Modern Times is not on this. I don't know what happened there, but nevertheless, it has the next couple songs are pretty decent. Well, the next one is pretty decent. Life is Hard, I like. It's got that folky feel. It's the one that Bob wrote for the film, and it's got that like mandolin flutter to it, which is cool. Apparently, in the film, Renee Zellweger sings it, mostly without accompaniment, which would be interesting to hear. I did not get a chance to listen to it. Dylan sings it a little mucusy, and I think it's a decent vocal, but it's not to the level of, his crooner songs that he was doing on the last couple albums, unfortunately. My Wife's Hometown might be my least favorite song on the album. Very much anti-spousal lyrics. Doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation, though I'm sure they're joking. But you got a very standard blues progression, and it's pretty much just a takeoff of "I Just Want to Make Love to You" by Willie Dixon. So it's kind of one of those almost to the level of When the Levee Breaks, where it's just like, we didn't need this. If you ever go to Houston. I think it's a nice breezy number. I like the accordion. I think maybe it's on a little too thick on this album overall. The novelty of it wears off after a couple songs, I think, and I just don't know if Dylan has really put together the songs to make like this Tex-Mex style really last through a whole album. Maybe that's the problem why nobody remembers it. Nobody really likes Tex-Mex that much. But I do like the bright sun-kissed electric guitar. It's a nice stand-up bass. Voice is pretty rough though. I'm not loving it. It's kind of killing the mood for me, especially on like the slower, breezier numbers. The bluesier stuff, I think it works a little bit better. Forgetful Heart got some more muscle in the guitar from Campbell. Love the presence of the Appalachian banjo. And the feel is kind of like a funeral dirge, and I think it just works for where Bob's at this point and how his voice sounds. Jolene's probably my favorite on the album. I love the hook from Mike Campbell. That guitar is just great. The sprawl of the organ, and I think Dylan reduces his range a little bit and sounds better because of it on that one. This Dream of You is nice. Has like a romantic Latin tinged pop song that you'd hear in a Mexican restaurant from a mariachi band feel to it, and I think it works pretty well. Shake Shake Mama, pretty much a straight up blues number. I think the music's pretty exciting. Dylan's voice is okay. He's doing his best to keep up with the music. And I like the way it sounds. So, like it's a good mix of instruments. It's a good production again. Dylan. I don't think this one's quite on the level of his last two, but it's still a pretty well produced album, pretty well mixed and everything. The organ on this album is pretty good, which Bob Dylan plays, and I think he does a good job on the keys. And I feel a change coming on. Might be the most classic sounding Dylan song on this album. Like it feels like a Bob Dylan song. And some of these other ones either just feel like blues numbers or like this weird Tex-Mex dressing on top of like semi Bob Dylan sounding songs. But this one, I think, feels a little more Dylan-y. And then the closer, It's All Good. A fine sarcastic number. Dylan describes a whole lot of bad things and then ends the verses with "It's all good." Like when you say something is bad to mean it's good, he's doing the opposite. It's good. It's bad. It's not exactly an original conceit, but I think it's used, effectively because he's a good writer. The guitar's good. The interplay with the accordion, especially, even if it is a little repetitive. And I don't know, usually the final songs on these Dylan albums, they have a little more, I don't know, interest to them. They have something more to say. I feel like something like It's All Good is just done so many times. Like it doesn't, it's not like a different kind of closer to leave you with something to chew on after. Like it's just sort of like, haha, funny, bad is good now, good is bad. I get it. I think overall it's a decent sound. I like Mike Campbell's guitar. I like enough of the accordion. I like the Tex-Mex flavor to it. It doesn't really badly on me throughout. I think it could be a little more interesting and maybe a little bit too much is placed on the emphasis on making that Tex-Mex sound and not enough on the songwriting. I think is not up to his usual standards. Maybe that's Robert Hunter's fault, but it's just it's a good album, but it's not a great album, and I can see why it's mostly sort of just ignored and forgotten about. It just seems to exist, and he tried something different, and it kind of worked, but it kind of different, and it didn't really inform anything that he was going to do going forward. And there's just not that much to say about it, despite us talking about a lot of stuff during this episode. Probably only half of it's going to be about this album.
Yeah, I think that you just hit the nail on the head about quite a few things. Honestly, it's I think it's a fine record. There's a decently well known Dylan podcast called Joker Men, and I believe in their Together Through Life episode, one of them very, I think, expertly described it as this is an album that you just put on. And he ended up describing it, but I also knew immediately what he meant. There's some albums that you put on, that you listen to as an experience. You you experience, Led Zeppelin 4 or any of these other classic records. There's other albums that you put on, to fit a certain, Together Through Life is, hey, grilling up some burgers in the backyard, and kids are playing by the pool, and people, yeah, you put on Together Through, you put it on.
As
Yeah,
Stephen Hayden would say, it's a good like back patio album. Like you throw it on, it's
yeah,
not like, it's not going to get in the way of your conversation. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's a nice
yeah,
Tex-Mex sound, but we're not going to really pay that close attention to it.
totally. And it works for that purpose because I think it's a consistent record. I don't think there's too much here that's exceptional. Nothing really miraculous. Um, there's also nothing so awful. I do think that there's some filler and some weaker tracks here, but I don't know if any of them would be in my bottom 50 Dylan songs or anything like that. You put it on. It's good. I will say, I think there's a nice, alluring sort of smokiness to the soundscape. I'm glad that you kind of honed in on the Tex-Mex vibe because to me it feels almost like a 21st century Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Uh, Different than that album, obviously in many ways, but certainly the accordion helps. And I am a Mike Campbell simp. Mike Campbell might be my favorite guitar player ever. I think he's so good on so many levels, and not much of this guitar work really like jumps out at you. um but when you really listen to it, just like he did with the Heartbreakers, it's always exactly what it needs to be. Like you need some nice stinging riffs and Beyond Here Lies Nothing, he can make that happen. You need that nice little catchy riff in Jolene, he can make that happen. You need those sort of like swells in between the lines of Forgetful Heart to make it this real barn burner, he can make it happen. And it always sounds great. Um, and there's so much here that's just, it's good. Like Shake Shake Mama, a great little groovy blues number. I think he has kind of a playful delivery on it. I think This Dream of You, it's a really nice ballad. Shake Shake Mama doesn't live up to a Thunder on the Mountain or a Lonesome Day Blues, and This Dream of You doesn't live up to a When the Deal Goes Down or a Moonlight, but they're still good, and Bob seems like he's in a decent mood. For me, the big high point is I Feel a Change Coming On. I completely agree with you. Checks the boxes of everything that I want from a 21st century Dylan tune. Great lyrics, good vocals. This is not the best Dylan vocal album. I agree with you on that, and I don't mind the gravel in general with Dylan. On this album, there's a few songs where I'm like, man, you couldn't have taken 2 seconds right there to go. And the album starts like that. Oh, I love you pretty. Literally the first lines. Yeah, yeah, there it is. Um, but it's good on I Feel a Change Coming On. And some of the lyrics that I'm listening to Neil Young, I'm reading James Joyce. Some people say I got the blood of the land in my voice. I'm like, well, that kind of makes all the gravel worth it because that just makes so much sense. And that's one I have such an amazing memory of seeing him in Boston right after the album came out. My dad and I were front row in the balcony looking down at him playing that song, and a hush just fell over the crowd, and it felt really important and amazing. So that one for me is the high point. I agree with you on My Wife's Hometown being my least favorite. And like, I'm a huge Muddy Waters fan. I Just Want to Make Love to You. So yeah, I can't say that I don't enjoy this tune fine enough from a musical standpoint, but I don't know. I just want to say that Hell's My Wife's Hometown is one of his most awkward hooks ever, and his vocal delivery on this one in particular doesn't really work for me. And there's a few other tunes. I don't know. I like Life is Hard. I like Jolene fine enough. I don't go back to them. And I completely agree with you on It's All Good. It's fine and it's funny enough, but doesn't do much from a musical perspective, doesn't do much from a melodic perspective. And lyrically, again, like you said, because he's such a good writer, it works fine enough. But again, Ain't Talkin' was such a crazy apocalyptic closer to modern times. Sugar Baby was this very sobering send off to Love and Theft. And even Highlands, which, neither of us are the biggest fan of, but Highlands is so absurd that regardless of whether you love it or you don't like it, it makes sense and it feels so quintessentially Bob. And this is sort of like, yeah, it works, which is kind of how a lot of the album is. Um, I have no issue ever listening to this record. I listened to it twice over the last week preparing for this, and I thought, wow, that was a perfectly fine way to. I didn't regret spending my time that way, but I just think it's a relatively, uh, like I said, inconsequential record that I happen to subjectively enjoy most of the songs on. Totally fine atmosphere. And that's why half of this episode is going to be talking about what we missed in the last one and talking about Brian Wilson, because there's not a whole lot more to say about it.
No, I mean, yeah, I totally agree. It's a cromulent album, and that is all it is, and all it will ever be. I don't think people are gonna look back in 50 years and be like, "Oh, we missed it." There's something there that we missed, and now like this is a big
Stupid.
important, yeah, this is a genius lost masterpiece from Bob Dylan,
Yeah.
hiding between modern times and Christmas in the Heart.
Yeah.
It's just not gonna happen. It's always gonna be kind of just an album that you don't really think about.
Yeah. It exists. But I will say, though, I can consider this a minor victory for you and for this podcast that we're talking about the 33rd album released in 2009 After all these albums, after so many years of Dylan doubt and contrarian haterade on your end, um, and the voice is gravelly, and there's a lot of standard blues progressions, and here you are saying, yeah, it's fine. You could have said so much worse. I bet you expected to say so much worse.
I, yeah, I mean, I thought it was going to be worse than it ended up being. But I mean, I guess at this point, I'm probably, I'm going to go 3.5 stars for it. I think it's a fine record. I had no problem listening to it. It's not something I would seek out again, but it seems to me that Bob Dylan has found, and perhaps it's just his age, the production style. I don't really foresee myself hating or really disliking anything else from here on out. I don't know, I might not even get to 4 stars again, but I don't think any of these albums are going to be, just the worst thing in the world that makes me want to, just myself or something crazy like that. I just kind of feel like he's found a really good elder statesman kind of groove to his record making. He's not forcing anything. He's kind of relaxed and loose about it. And I feel like it works. And I feel like he's found that in old age much better than, for the most part, somebody like Neil Young.
Mhm.
Um, I don't even know who else would be comparable, having 30, 40 albums. Just like Van Morrison would be one that's sort of like he lost the plot. Um,
No, not
not
Van.
Van, not Van. But Bob seems just more comfortable in his own skin and his own celebrity and his own, I can't think of the word, but just his own genius, and he's just sort of good with it, and he's just putting out records when he wants to in a way he wants to, and it doesn't seem forced, and I think that's important, especially for an older artist, because he's not trying to be like reliving the glory days at this point, and I just think that is a good thing. It's a very good mindset to have.
Okay, so Bob has found his groove at this point in his career. He's found his niche. He's probably not changing, but what's that? A few months into the distance.
I wish I had some sleigh bells or something.
It's an yeah, it's another album. So how how much do you want to stand on that state? Going it okay. Christmas in the Heart is next. I and I've been Joe, I've been waiting to say those words. You have okay. It was a little difficult for me trying to feign excitement over the Together Through Life episode, because as much as I like this album fine enough, and I'm happy that you like it fine enough too. I think we're probably on a very similar level with it. It's difficult to be super excited about a record that only means so much in the grand scheme of things, doesn't have a whole lot of lore, doesn't have a whole lot of lasting impact, that I didn't have super high hopes for your reaction to. I could not be more genuinely. I'm so excited. What do you know about Christmas in the Heart? What have you heard or seen from Christmas in the Heart? What do you expect from Christmas in the Heart? Because you just said you think that Bob has figured it all out and he's set in his ways. Your words, not mine. So answer all of these questions for me.
I know of Christmas in the Heart, and that is the extent of my knowledge of it. It's sort of like, I don't even know, like the Yeti or Abominable Snowman, where like I heard about it, but I didn't really think it existed. Now I'm gonna have to face my fears and listen to a Bob Dylan Christmas album. I think at the beginning of this, podcast, I would have been just absolutely horrified to listen to something like that. For one, usually when artists are breaking out a Christmas album, it's because they're completely washed and they have nothing left to give the world musically, lyrically. They're just gonna rest, on a Christmas album. It's gonna sell. It always sells. Christmas is very popular in this country. But I just don't feel now, I just don't feel like that's what Bob Dylan would do like other artists. Like he's not going to do it because he's washed up and has nothing else to say. He's going to do it because it's what no one expected him to do, and that is what Bob Dylan does, and that's what he does best. Just totally turn the tables on people, subvert their expectations. So once I was frightened, I'm now excited to listen to Christmas in the Heart because I just have no idea what it's going to sound like. Like it, in my mind, it can go either like totally like straight blues interpretations of Christmas songs, or like with all the trappings and trimmings of Christmas, like the jingle bells going off and like this big ornate production. Like it could go either way, or it could probably go a third way right down the middle with some like nice folkiness. I don't know, but I'm excited. I'm very excited to hear.
Oh my God. I feel have you ever like seen a movie that blew there was a twist at the end that blew your mind, or like something shifted halfway through, and it's all you could think about, and then you got together with one of your friends and you're like, hey, let's watch this movie, and you're just sort of watching them the whole time because you've already seen it, but oh my God, I am this close to buying a flight to Pittsburgh, and I don't even need to tell. I'll just stare through. Like I'll text you, like, "Hey, when are you gonna listen?" Just so I can watch. I'll be full voyeur. Like I'm so excited. Where we will get into this more next episode, but briefly, where do you stand in general on Christmas music, and how do you feel about having to listen to a Christmas album in June or July, which is something you've done before with certain listographies? You've had to listen to Christmas music outside the season before. This is obviously different than all of those. But yeah, what's your mindset here?
I don't mind listening to Christmas music outside of the Christmas season. I usually mind listening to other popular artists try to do Christmas songs. Usually that's where the disconnect is for me because they just, unless you're the Beach Boys, Stevie Wonder did it pretty good. There's just not a lot of other albums, Christmas albums from pop artists that I can think of where I'm like, yes, this adds to the original song. This is something, that's good and necessary and, something beyond what everybody already knows. So, and usually when we're doing a discography, I'll listen to like 30 seconds of the song and just click next and just go through it. Yeah, I listened to this one. It was 3 stars. I wouldn't do that. But I'm not going to do that. Definitely not for this one.
Oh, no, you
I'm going to listen to
won't.
every second,
Yeah,
every millisecond of this album.
multiple times.
Yes, at least twice.
I like it's pretty messed up that even in Kramzer's absence, you take the time to speak ill of his favorite Whitney Houston record like that. Um, so unfortunate. Cram, if you're watching, I've got your back. It would probably be my favorite Whitney Houston record too. Well, listen, I'm not going to tell you what to expect going into this. You know what? I've held your hand through 33 albums. You're on your own, kid. Okay, listen. You're This is what to expect. You're about to listen to a Bob Dylan Christmas album, and a Bob Dylan Christmas album again in 2009. Again, he's a decade into a career renaissance at this point. If he recorded this record in 1987 or like 1992, then yeah, it would be like, okay, what's he do is, he's either so yeah, he's so messed up that this is the only thing he can think to do, or he's trying so hard to just get some record sales because he needs money. Like, that is the last thing he needs to do at this point. And you don't need me to hold your hand. The only thing is, embrace it. Embrace I Guys, everyone out there watching, this is going to be so fun. I'm so excited about this.
I'm really pumped. I think it'll probably be our most viewed show ever. Most likely a Christmas episode in the middle of July talking about Bob Dylan's 34th album from 2009, Christmas from the Heart. Absolutely.
My God. This is as good a time as any, I would say, if you haven't already, to please uh, look into the Taste Like Music Patreon. And if you donate as little as $1 a month, come be a part of our Discord community. Joe and I are on there way too much. I have to set up. I have set up timers on my phone to limit myself, because there's so many great people, so many hilarious people, and we're there, and Jason's there, and a bunch of people you probably see in the comments already are there, and we're just having fun when we talk about music and everything else. And we finally have an excuse in earnest to talk about Christmas in the Heart. It's so wonderful. I'm so excited. And I don't want to say that I just wanted to get through together through life. Um, but I kind of did. And here we are.
We could tell you really phoned in this episode. You have anything else to say about Christmas from the Heart? You were just like giddy as a schoolgirl. Like you can't even contain yourself.
I listen. I can't. We got next episode.
Next
I
episode.
I get. Well, I I have so many thoughts.
Well, we're done with Together Through Life. We got through it together, and we'll probably never talk about it or any of its songs ever again. And I've already forgotten about it because, oh, wait, did you have an interjection? Was your, did you,
Oh no, I was just gonna say, at the end of this, we did our 60s, 70s, and 80s song list. You know, After the 80s, because the albums become more infrequent, I think it will make a lot more sense to do 90s to present, our top 20 songs. And there's a song or two on here that may stand a chance.
I can see maybe one or two sneaking in onto my list. We will see. I don't want to make any promises.
Yes.
But like I said, I've already totally forgotten about everything that happened in this episode and the album because Christmas is in our hearts and Bob Dylan's as well. Christmas from the Heart is our next album. You better start listening to it. We'll probably,
Christmas in
record
the
it quick.
Heart.
In the Heart?
Yeah,
Did I say from the heart?
you did. How dare you disrespect it?
Christmas in the Heart. Start listening to that album, not Christmas from the Heart. I don't know where that's going to take you. Christmas in the Heart from Bob Dylan. Listen to it, get it in because we'll be recording that episode sooner rather than later because I don't want Dylan to explode from anticipation. As always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, check the description for all the good social media stuff and links to our Patreon where you can become a patron, join the Discord as low as $1 a month. And that's it. Listen to Christmas in the Heart, and we will see you next time to discuss in minute detail Bob Dylan's greatest album. See you next time.